Why the first Starship Troopers movie failed as a parody, a thread. Watching the movie, it was clear the director was aiming for a campy, over-the-top depiction of the Terran Federation. Perhaps not an outright mockery, but certainly a drastic departure from the serious novel. Now, I should probably state at this point that I have not read Starship Troopers, the novel. I have read another Robert Heinlein novel called Stranger in a Strange Land, which I did enjoy, but I've not read Starship Troopers. So I have, if there's any sort of further basis of like the novel does this, the movie does that, I am out of my depth there. And yes, this discourse is coming back around because of the success of Helldivers 2, which is heavily inspired by Starship Troopers. First, let's tackle the writing pitfall that irks leftists to this day. If you make your characters naturally handsome, fit, and well-groomed, then it becomes increasingly difficult to properly mock them. Beauty is self-evident, and all characters in Starship Troopers are good-looking. This strikes me, and maybe it's just because I'm an ugly fuck, at least by most people's standards. I mean, I personally like the way I look, but I know other people have said, you know, that I'm an ugly fucking piece of, you know, loathsome shit that's hard on the eyes or whatever. You know, I don't let it affect me or anything. You know, I mean, I just cry myself to sleep some nights, but that's fine. But, you know, I don't really understand this point because there are plenty of characters in media that are attractive physically and are thought of as fucking villains and evil, right? Like, I guess that, you know, typically speaking, the ugly character is more likely to be the villain and the handsome, beautiful character is more likely to be the good guy. But there's plenty of instances that turn that trope on its head. So I don't know why Starship Troopers in particular would be like this exception. A character being good looking does not connote any sort of like moral goodness to that character. And if you think it does, then, you know, I think maybe you're just too stupid to understand satire in the first place. Hey, if you like this clip, you might like the full stream, which I do every Sunday, more or less, over on the Pessimist Productions Patreon, link down below. Thank you kindly. This extends the overall Terran Federation as well. We see clean, beautiful streets. Life seems good for Rico and his polite high school. This is a far cry from the crime-ridden and drug-addicted cities we know of today, where there are where are the homeless encampments, the ghettos? I mean, look, there are plenty of signs that life in the Terran Federation is not all it's cracked up to be. I mean, we see a criminal proceeding wherein someone is accused of murder that morning and then executed publicly that evening. And it's pretty clear that like their justice system is just like, you know, if you're accused, you're guilty. There's no sort of actual ability to defend yourself. You're just fucked. So that's not great. We know that only citizens are allowed to vote in this system. And the only way you can get citizenship is by serving in the military and essentially giving up your, you know, like, we see that all of the characters who have served in the military are like missing limbs. There's even a scene where, you know, Rico, the main character, is, you know, telling this guy that he's going to be in infantry. And the guy's like, it made me the man I am today. And he's got a robot arm because he, you know, lost his arm in combat. So, like, basically, it's even worse than our current American society where we've simply gate-kept socialism behind the barrier of military service. This society is actually gate-kept even just like the right to vote behind military service. So if you want to have the right to vote, you have to be indoctrinated into the military. You have to basically allow military programming to take over your brain. You have to adopt a military mindset, and you have to be willing to fucking die or, you know, get butchered in some way, shape, or form just to earn that most basic of human rights in a society, the right to vote, the right to determine the direction of said society. This is an idea that I've heard conservatives say is a good one, even to this day. And absolutely does not. So this idea that this society seems to be devoid of social ills, I think, is pretty preposterous. That being said, yes, the streets are clean. Good point. Can we nail the Federation for being Terran Federation for being cruel? I guess, but when you play it off cruelty as a joke, you're undermining your own message. This isn't a dialogue about brutal conditions for training soldiers in a futuristic setting. This is a gag, and it's hilarious. I mean, this is but one of many moments. Like we see scenes where people are flogged in the public square for making mistakes. We've seen scenes, like, once again, where people are executed the same day they've been accused of a crime with no chance to mount any sort of legal defense. We see scenes where, I mean, like, the very fact that the Terran Federation goes to war with the bugs under false pretenses, I think, is a pretty good indicator that this is not a great society. Like, a meteor hits the Earth, somehow these bugs that are not shown to be able to control meteors in any way, shape, or form are blamed for it. And, you know, a bunch of people are sent into the meat grinder of Clandathu, I believe is the name of the planet, to go exterminate the bugs. But it seems like it's nothing more than a giant distraction, you know, because there's no evidence these bugs actually did this attack in the first place. It's kind of strongly hinted that they didn't. All right, what about the critique of comparison? Perhaps the enemies of the Terran Federation have a better system. Oh, wait, no, they're bugs. I've seen people genuinely argue the bugs are supposed to be sympathetic, but they're still bugs. I mean, I don't know that the bugs are supposed to be sympathetic. I think that the whole point is that they're fucking ugly. I think the whole point is that these bugs are hard to empathize with. They're hard to sympathize with, which makes them easy to brutally exterminate. Because, like, we do that in our society. We exterminate bugs. If there's a bunch of bugs in your house, you hire an exterminator to kill them. So, like, it's meant to be something that you can follow along those lines. Like, oh, man, them bugs. And then it's like anybody who speaks out and says, like, why are we doing this? Why are we sacrificing all of this, you know, these resources and lives to go conquer this planet of bugs? It's like, well, what are you, some kind of bug lover? Right? This is not a face I can relate to, sympathize for, or even have a dialogue with. This screams at me, kill it with fire. Even if I didn't want to kill this thing, I want to be in orbit far away from this creature. It's horrific, and only a contrarian can argue against that. The fact that you can't sympathize with something that's ugly, I don't know. I think that says more about you than it says about the film. Like, yeah, it's not pretty to look at from a human perspective. As an anthropocentric species, we look at something like this and we think it's scary and ugly. But that speaks to the failing of the human animal. It doesn't speak to the failing of this thing. Like, the aesthetics of this thing are probably the aesthetics that it evolved on this planet and have served it well. You know, if the bugs even have a concept of aesthetics or concern for that sort of thing. But, like, looking at something that's ugly from a human perspective, I mean, this is like looking at someone who's like a burn victim and saying, like, oh man, they're hideous. I feel no sympathy for that person because they're ugly. Like, that just shows to me a lack of character on your part and a lack of ability to read anything beneath the superficial. The only thing you can really critique about the Terran Federation is the propaganda and incompetence. But when everything is so slapstick, it fails at landing a serious point. Man, you know, that's the big problem with satire. Why are all these satires trying to inject humor into the situation? It's almost like that's what a satire is or something. Like, satire is supposed to be funny, right? That's what fucking satire is. It's a form of fucking comedy, right? Satire is not supposed to be some, like, drab, serious fucking, It's supposed to be fucking funny. It's supposed to be like, we're making jokes at the expense of this. These guys are badasses in a funny movie, not a warning about the dangers of fascism. Okay. Well, I mean, you know, I think that your reading of this stuff is incredibly superficial and incredibly limited to, like, the purely aesthetic. It seems like anything that ventures beyond the aesthetic is just like you have a blind spot to it. Like, you can't see subtext. You can't see any sort of like underlying moral ambiguities or anything like that. All you see is like pretty people kill ugly bugs. And if that's your read, then like maybe you're just too stupid to understand the movie. In fact, there's not much of a maybe about it. You are.